My name is Donald Palmer. I'm here with Commissioner McCormick and our guest today. The title of this webinar, or should we call Zoom interview, is Considerations for CARES Act Election Funding that took place with the recent response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Our guests today will include Secretary Merrill and Secretary Lee. And before we get started, I'd like to, Secretary Merrill is from Alabama and Secretary Lee is from Florida. And before we get started, I'd like to introduce them and with their bios. Secretary Merrill has dedicated his life to public service. Early in his youth, he was an Eagle Scout, and he was in the Student Government Association at the University of Alabama. And that was prior to his professional career in the West Alabama Chamber of Commerce and with the Tuscaloosa County Public Schools. A native of Heflin, Alabama, he was first elected to public office as a representative of the Alabama House District 62 in 2010. He was elected Secretary of State in 2014, and he has dramatically enhanced the efficiency of his office through a series of reform and innovations. And since he took office, Alabama has more than 1 million newly registered voters, setting new state records for voter registration and participation in elections. Secretary Laurel was appointed by Governor Ron DeSantis to serve as Florida's 36th Secretary of State in February of 2019. In addition to leading the Florida Department of State, Secretary Lee's duties include serving as Florida's Chief Election Official, Chief Cultural Officer, and Chief Protocol Officer. Prior to her position as Secretary of State, she served as a circuit court judge in Hillsborough County, Florida, where she presided in the circuit, civil, appellate, East County, and domestic relations divisions of the 13th Judicial Circuit. Now, before becoming a judge, Secretary Lee served as an assistant USA, United States attorney in the Middle District of Florida, and an assistant federal public defender in the Middle District of Florida. She obtained a bachelor's degree and a Juris Doctorate from the University of Florida, where she was a member of the Florida Blue Key. She was inducted into the University of Florida Hall of Fame in 1999. Well, I'd like to welcome both of the secretaries to this discussion about the COVID-19 response and what your states are doing. I'm going to hand it over to to Commissioner McCormick for the first question for y'all to answer.
Great. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
So our first question is, how did you and your staff members begin planning for your response to the coronavirus pandemic? And I'll start with Secretary Lee, because you all probably didn't have a lot of time to prepare, given that you've already had a primary during this time.
That's right.
Pretty quickly.
It did. So our preparation and response to the pandemic really began in connection with our presidential preference primary, which was March 17th. At that time, the public health guidance about the coronavirus was evolving, and it was changing almost on a daily basis. So we ensured that what the guidance we were receiving from our public health officials was passed down to our local elections officials and also our election workers and poll workers. So one of the most important things that we did was make sure that the most up-to-date, current, accurate information was being shared so that the precautions that were being recommended, like social distancing and sanitation, were implemented at the precinct level. We also assisted some of our local elections officials with obtaining supplies that they needed. Some had a sufficient supply of hand sanitizer and disinfectant wipes, and others did not. So we connected with our Department of Emergency Management and made sure that the jurisdictions that needed it were able to obtain some additional supplies to help equip their precincts.
Great, thank you so much. Secretary Merrill, how are you planning, your staff and you, how are you planning to deal with this?
Commissioner asked a great question. I tell you, one of the things that we did back in 2019, as we were evaluating where we were in the state and where we were in our office and administration of elections, we realized back in 2018 there was no mechanism in place for the governor, for any other individual, for any entity, the legislature, to move, postpone, or suspend an election if it was necessary because of a natural disaster or declaration of emergency. So we brought forth legislation in 2019 to give the governor the ability to be able to make that change if it was necessary. I had a couple of legislators tell me last year, this is not something that we're interested in doing. It's not going to go anywhere. We've never had to worry about this. We never will have to worry about it in the future. Little did we know, 1 year later, we brought the bill again. And as it was moving through the legislative process, one of the things that became evident was it would not become law prior to the time that it was necessary for us to take action. Our primary was scheduled and held on March the 3rd, one of the earlier primaries in the southern states. But we knew that we had to do something. So I went to Attorney General Steve Marshall, asked him to evaluate what we were proposing, which was under Title 39-9-1. Did the governor have the ability to be able to suspend or postpone the election because of the declared state of emergency? He indicated that she did. And after that result was received, we had a meeting with the governor to talk about what our options were. Now, one of the things that we did, and I'll talk more about this in a few minutes, was we made sure that when this whole process began, we were continuing to have discussions with General Marshall, continuing to have discussions with Governor Ivey to make sure we were where we needed to be if it got to this particular point. To make a long story short, what we ended up doing was postponing our runoff until July 14th, and that's where we are today.
Okay. Secretary Lee, do you have something similar, emergency statutes in Florida?
We do. And in Florida, those statutes already existed. So our governor would have the authority to make those types of adjustments if we were in a situation where we felt it was necessary.
Okay. Commissioner Palmer, do you want to take the next question?
Sure. The next question is really, how did you all work with your local election officials, sort of assess the situation and their greatest needs with the incoming primary and with COVID-19? And what have their main concerns been, and how have you addressed it?
Well, we've maintained constant communication with them. We have regularly scheduled conference calls, and I also speak to many of our local elections officials one-on-one to keep a current assessment of what their concerns are and what they think their needs will be. Going into our presidential preference primary in March, again, many of those things related to that personal protective equipment that they needed, whether it was gloves and masks or extra bottles of hand sanitizer or bleach wipes to make sure that they were keeping the precincts clean. As we begin looking forward to August and November, some of the things that they are interested in include, they're anticipating perhaps an increased interest in voters voting by mail. So some of them are interested in the supplies and equipment that they might need to facilitate that, and also ensuring that voters are aware of their options. In Florida, we actually already have numerous options for voters that are available, including voting by mail, early voting, and election day voting. So I know the local elections officials are very interested, as are we at the Department of State, in ensuring that voters have all of the accurate information they need about how to exercise the option that's right for them.
Secretary Merrill.
Thank you, Commissioner. We continue to reach out to our probate judges on a weekly basis and talk to them primarily through email in our 67 counties. Just like Secretary Lee, we both have 67 counties. Their apparatus, of course, in Florida, and you know this well, being the chief election official in Florida before the direct supervisor of elections there, it's set up differently than it is in the state of Alabama. But one of the things that we wanted to do is to make sure we've listened to their concerns, listened to the issues that they brought forth, and that we're giving primary attention to those things to make them have a higher comfort level than they've had before. One of the things that's so very important in a time of crisis is to maintain confidence in leaders and to maintain confidence in leadership and what's actually happening, and that's what we have done, and that's what we intend to continue to do.
Great. Commissioner McCormick, do you want to take the next question?
Sure. So as you know, Congress provided $425 million to the states in the CARES Act. So our question to you is, how are you planning to use the CARES Act funding to prepare for the potential increase in absentee or mail voting? And I'll start with you, Secretary Merrill.
Well, one of the things that we were excited about was the input that we were able to have in the drafting of that legislation, and being able to communicate with Senator McConnell directly, Senator McConnell's team directly, Senator Shelby and his team directly, to make sure they understood that they needed input from the states to ensure that we were not going to just have a one-size-fits-all edict come down from the Congress to the states indicating what we needed to do, but giving us the freedom and the flexibility to do what is necessary. In the state of Alabama, because we had already had our presidential preference primary and local and state elections on March the 3rd, our primary runoff was going to be scheduled for March 31st. And so we had people that were already applying for absentee ballots and voting absentee. So what we made a decision to do, and in a time of declared state of emergency, our Code of Alabama, Title 17-9-3, gives me the ability as the Secretary of State to change the process if necessary. And so we extended the period of time where absentee ballots would be accepted and people could make application, given more than 100 days for each and every voter in our state to be able to respond by applying for an absentee ballot. We give them the opportunity to download that ballot application at alabamavotes.gov or contact our local circuit clerk or absentee election manager to request the absentee ballot application. And then to successfully complete that process, they have to return a copy of their valid photo ID. In doing so, it enables them to vote. Now, another thing that we needed to do was to make sure that everybody was going to be properly prepared for the runoff that we rescheduled to July 14th. So we're using the resources that have been made available to us to purchase masks, to purchase non-latex gloves, to purchase hand sanitizer, to purchase sanitized wipes, to purchase disinfectant spray that will be used on all the equipment and in the locations in all 1,980 polling sites in the state of Alabama. But another thing we've done is to ensure the people that make those polling sites available, all 1,980 polling sites, that we will go in after the election has been completed and we will disinfect that site and we will leave it in a pristine condition, probably even cleaner than it was when we used it for the election, to make sure that people are confident in knowing what has occurred and that they are protected. Also, we have increased the pay for our poll workers, and we're using that stimulus money to cover the cost of the work being done by our absentee election managers so the state and local governments do not have to absorb that cost.
Great. Secretary Lee, how are you all using the CARES Act money?
So we are still developing in concert with our local election officials the plan. Some of the things that we have heard expressed as concern are very similar to what Secretary Merrill identified. Of course, the supplies that are needed at the precinct level for our election workers. Here too, we have heard a lot of interest about sanitation post-use of our precinct locations. That's something that was very important during our PPP and we anticipate will continue to be. We also expect that there will be additional workers who are needed to process and manage vote by mail ballots. So that is one thing that we expect to see. And we also have some officials who are interested in updating or adding additional equipment for the purpose of sorting or processing ballots that come in through the mail. And finally, postage. Some are interested in discussing the prospect of potentially providing postage in those areas where it is not already provided.
Great, thank you very much. Commissioner Palmer?
So my question is, we talked a little bit about what you're anticipating with increased absentee or mail voting. Any other considerations on early voting or election day with your poll workers that you are considering?
Hey, somebody needs to feed that dog.
I'm sorry, that is my dog.
There is one thing, CARES Act funding cannot be used to feed the dog though. That's pretty clear. But if you have anything on sort of how you're looking at early voting or pre-election day voting and election day on poll worker training and recruitment?
Well,
yes.
Commissioner,
go ahead. I'm sorry, Secretary Merrill.
Yeah, one of the things that we have done we are anticipating that we will have in-person voting on July 14th. That's one of the main reasons we set that date when we did. That's the last possible date that we could hold the runoff and it not interfere with the November 3rd general election. All certifications, all deadlines will be able to be met between that time and November the 3rd. But we wanted to make sure that our people knew we were open to suggestions, but we're not open to starting a brand new election process in the state of Alabama. We want to make it easy to vote and hard to cheat in our state. That's what we've done since I've been the Secretary of State. That's what we're going to continue to do. And one of the main ways to be able to do that is to enhance the opportunity for people to participate through absentee voting or in-person voting, but not to just get an entirely new process introduced. You know, one of the things that a number of states are considering and that a number of people are saying, look, this has to be done, this needs to be done, is having direct mail voting where people can mail in their ballots. And that's something that's never happened in a particular state before, but they think because of the coronavirus, it can happen now. Experts tell us that unless your state was already at a 60% clip in returning your ballots by mail, 60% of those ballots being returned by mail, then you don't even need to consider it at this particular time for a number of reasons, which we can get into if they're important to you. But in Alabama, our return by mail percentage is 4% on an annual quadrennial basis for the presidential cycle, which is the largest numbers that we have.
Secretary Lee?
So I think a couple of things that Secretary Merrill has said are important, and I agree. I think, you know, one thing that I've seen really consistently expressed to us from both our state and local elections officials is that it is not the time to try to reinvent our systems that are working. And you know, as I mentioned here, we actually have very vibrant and active different methods that voters have to choose to use when they vote, whether it is via mail, early voting, or in-person voting. But that is, we actually received a letter here from our State Association of Supervisors of Elections expressing that while there were things that we could be doing at the state level to equip and support and assist them, that they did not believe that we were in a position at this time to go to an entirely vote by mail system. Earlier, Secretary Merrill expressed that it was important for our states to maintain flexibility. And that is entirely consistent with what I see and what I hear here in Florida, that our states are different one to the next. And even within a state like Florida, we have incredible diversity from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. So our supervisors in large urban areas might not have the same types of needs that those who are operating in rural communities do. So we want to provide them as much support and information as we possibly can, while also not restricting their ability to do their job effectively as their community and as their residents need to see it done. So we are planning on, we're hoping to use CARES funds to, again, provide those needed supplies out to our communities, and also potentially look at recruiting and compensating election workers. So we're in the process now of collaborating with our governor's office and our state legislature and the elections officials to work through how that plan can most effectively and efficiently be implemented here.
Secretary Lee, just a follow-up on that. In your experience, you know, obviously Florida's had to deal with a lot of hurricanes in the past. Do you think the flexibility has helped, you know, jurisdictions or counties deal with the flexibility in voting has helped Florida voters deal with sort of hurricanes and the occasional nasty storms that come along, flooding?
Absolutely. And one thing about Florida is that we are accustomed to dealing with unexpected circumstances and emergency circumstances. And our supervisors are very experienced and very adaptable and really have done a tremendous job getting ready and preparing for this new challenge that we face. But yes, I think that flexibility has been critical to our success because we are such a large state and such a diverse state that the type of challenge or barrier that one local elections official is encountering might not exist at all in another part of our state. So, we deal with jurisdictions that are as unique as Miami, a very large urban center, all the way to the complete opposite, where we'll have a small rural community where precinct-based voting is very important to that community because the residents are very spread out and they're not very numerous. So we try at the state level to understand that the needs and the challenges they face are unique, and that what we can do really is make sure that we support them, equip them, but understand and also respect that what they need to serve their citizens could be very different from one community to the next.
Thank you. Secretary Merrill, did you want to add to that before I turn it over to Commissioner?
No, I think that she summed it up pretty well. And the thing that we have to remember is we are the people that will be distributing these resources to the local election officials. They need to be mindful of all of those concerns that are there from their constituents and how they can best meet those. I think it's important to note too that the way we've elected to use the CARES money here is to appropriate it based on the need that the counties have, and that they have to show us receipts, and then we will reimburse them for the expenses that they've had, so we can validate that the resources they've spent that money on actually meet the qualification standard that EAC would require.
Secretary Merrill, before I hand it over to Commissioner McCormick, can I just drill down on that one issue with your localities? So what sort of cost are they anticipating they will need, for election day or for the primary, and they're going to take an accounting of, for federal grant purposes?
Well, it depends on the location, of course. Again, and Secretary Lee touched on it very, very well. There's a lot of difference in Birmingham and Huntsville and Mobile and Montgomery and Tuscaloosa than there is in Rimlap and Cusada and Heflin and Phil Campbell. I mean, when you're looking at those communities, there's a lot of difference about the impact that these resources will make. And yet, what we've got to make sure that our local election officials understand, and we believe that they do, is that they need to make decisions based on their planning, just like they do when they're ordering their ballots, or they're setting up their locations for their precinct sites for elections to take place, and not to say, okay, we've got this big pot of money here, now we can dip our hand in there and grab out what we think we need and hope that it's enough. You have to execute your plan, which is why we have continued to remind all of our voters over the last 2 weeks, 3 weeks, how many days are left that they can actually make absentee application. We have actually cut a public service announcement for the radio and television that will be airing statewide that will remind them, and to encourage our election officials to have alternate polling sites available, to have alternate poll workers identified, to use the resources that we gave them in 2019 when we passed legislation that allows high school students to be able to work the polls and to do any job at the polling site except actually handle the ballot unless they're 18 years of age. So all of those things are so very important, but they need to be consistently reminded of that so that they'll be making good choices and good decisions as they continue to move forward.
Thank you, Secretary. Commissioner McCormick.
Yeah, so this is kind of a good follow-on to that. Those of us who work in elections know that no two elections are alike. And, each election has its own story, whether it's hanging chads or long lines or statewide recounts. So this year it's the COVID-19 virus. What would you say is your state's biggest obstacle for the upcoming elections, and how are you planning to use the CARES Act money to help overcome that obstacle? Secretary Lee?
Yeah, I would say one thing that I anticipate will be of critical importance for us is combating any misinformation or disinformation that might be out there about voting, how to vote, where to vote, even the public health measures that are being taken to ensure that we are prioritizing voter safety and election worker safety, but also the integrity of our elections process. So I anticipate that one important use for CARES funding may be that voter education piece, to make sure that we are sharing with voters accurate and timely important information that they will need as election day approaches. And then, of course, second to that, I think another challenge that we're facing certainly is acquisition of supplies, making sure that there are adequate resources to share with our communities that require those supplies at the precinct level, and making sure that we are funding and supporting those supplies where they are needed.
Secretary Merrill?
Commissioner, I think the most important thing that we can do is to ensure that we do not lose the confidence and the trust that's been placed in us by the constituents of our state when they're evaluating their desire to, interest in, and ability to participate in the electoral process. If we lose the confidence that the voter possesses, we'll see that negatively impacted when it comes to the returns at the polling site. And we don't want to see that. So we have to continually inform them. We have to continually make sure that we are educating them. We have to make sure that they know all the things that are going on that enable them to understand that we are as prepared as we can be. We're working hard every day to meet their needs, and we want them to get out and cast their ballot for the candidate of their choice, either in person or through the absentee process, because we still want to see them at the polls.
Yeah, I think you both make a great point. Communication is critical this year, especially I think with vulnerable groups such as voters with disabilities or voters who speak other languages, or who traditionally have fought to gain the vote, the African American community. Are you all doing any particular outreaches to those communities differently, especially now when there's so much question about how we're going to be able to vote and whether we can have confidence in the outcome of the elections?
Well, we continue to reach out to each one of our 4.8 million citizens, and we want all 3,591,503 registered voters in Alabama to vote on July the 14th. But we want to make sure that they're doing everything they can to educate themselves and to be informed. No, we are not taking specific measures or specific steps to reach this particular population that's between the ages of 18 and 25, or this particular minority population that's African American predominantly, or this particular elderly population that may be in the nursing homes or assisted living. We are working hard to reach each and every one of our voters because we want to make sure that they know what's going on, that they can have any question that they have answered to their satisfaction by reaching out to us on our phone at 334-242-7200, on my cell at 334-328-2787, whatever it takes to raise their level of efficacy to participate in the process is what we're going to provide.
And we do have a couple of specific things in Florida that we're working on in that regard. Of course, in Florida, we have a wonderful, unique, diverse population here. And so one thing that's important to us is that voters who need it have access to election materials that are in their language, that is their language of preference or necessity. And so we are working right now on some promulgation of some rulemaking to ensure that there's access to Spanish language materials for voters who need it. And one of the plans that we have, not for CARES Act funding, but for the prior HAVA funding in 2020, was to specifically address voters with disabilities, voters who needed special accommodations, to make sure that we have the proper equipment at the local level to accommodate any voters who need those special types of equipment. But to Secretary Merrill's point, I agree wholeheartedly that what our guiding principle is that we want to make sure that every single Floridian knows how to vote and is given an opportunity to learn more about how to register if they're not already registered, and then also those who are given all of the information that they need about the ways that they can vote, and how that can best fit their circumstances or their needs. So I know we are planning on voter outreach in hopes of reaching every single voter in our state and all of those who haven't voted yet, but we want to see them come out this time. So it's a key priority for us to do exactly that.
Great. Commissioner Palmer.
Thank you, Commissioner McCormick. The last question I have for y'all is, you know, Secretary Lee, you just went through a presidential primary in the middle of changing environment with COVID-19. And Secretary Merrill, you basically had to postpone your election. What advice would you give other election officials that may be about to go through this, or who knows, we may have to go through this in November? What would be your advice to other election officials on how to administer these elections in this?
Well, Commissioner, that's a great question. And Secretary Lee and I have talked about this privately. We've talked about this in group settings where we've been together through social distancing, of course, just like we are today. But the most important thing that you can do is have a great relationship, not a good relationship, but a great relationship with those other elected officials that you have to rely on and you have to communicate with and you have to depend on during times of crisis and interruption of services like we're experiencing now. And if you're just trying to establish a relationship with your governor today, or with your attorney general today, or with the people in the field today at your local election area, whether it be the probate judge or whether it be the supervisor of elections, then you're way behind. And you better be using your time now between today and whenever your next election effort is to make sure you have those relationships. One of the things that we have seen repeatedly by people all across the nation, and this is not just held to one particular region of the country, but how many people have not been on the same page? The governor will be saying one thing about the elections, Secretary of State will be saying another thing. Judicial branch will be challenged. They don't have the information that they need, and all those decisions that are made are not positive for that particular state. We've seen that happen on numerous occasions, and it's the worst thing that can occur during this particular time of crisis, because that helps the individual voter who's already questioning what's happening lose confidence in the process.
Secretary Lee?
Yes, I agree. I think it is critical that the relationships and lines of communication be well established and in place way in advance of the actual election day or the actual crisis erupting, because that was really crucial for us to already have those strong relationships with our local elections officials, and also our federal partners are a absolutely essential part of success, whether it is DHS and CISA and the FBI, you know, all of our federal partners in that regard who help us plan for and prepare for our unexpected circumstances, or the National Guard. All of these are groups that come through and help us when we're in a time of crisis, whether it's related to a hurricane or related now to our public health crisis. Also the EAC and our other federal partners who help us understand what types of resources may be available to us and how we can appropriately and best use them. So I do think that the single most important way to be prepared, because we don't necessarily know what's around the corner or what precisely will be the circumstances that exist at the time of the election, the best thing we can do is have all of those relationships in place, be collaborating together with each other so that we're agile and able to quickly adapt and meet the needs that exist for our citizens.
Thank you, Secretary Lee. I really appreciate your comments and the relationship that we've been able to build with the secretaries, and that establishing those lines of communication are so important. Do either of you have anything else to add before we wrap this up? Any last comments generally about the COVID-19 funds or any other topic before we wrap this up?
I just want to thank you and Commissioner McCormick, Commissioner Hicks and Commissioner Hovland for being open to, willing to, interested in, and desirous of listening to us, helping us meet our needs, being available to help us solve the problems that are presented to us, and to be able to allow us to be as effective as we can possibly be in the administration of our elections at the state and local level.
Thank you.
Yes, and I agree with that sentiment. Just in the last couple of weeks, the resources and webinars and presentations and all that are coming to us from the EAC, that guidance has been so important to us in understanding the scope of the CARES Act and how we can properly use those funds. So I very much appreciate the support and guidance that we have been receiving.
Well, thank you both. I want to thank you. We really appreciate you coming on. I believe it was very beneficial, and I think our viewers will find it very beneficial as well. With that, I wish you both good luck in November. August as well, actually. And obviously, Secretary Merrill, you have a primary coming up as well, and we wish you the best of luck.
Thank y'all so much.
What was that, Secretary Merrill?
Thank y'all.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So much.
Okay.